let's get on another episode of Hometown Foundations. Today we're in Myerstown, Pennsylvania. This was named for Isaac Meier, founder, and it was founded in 1762. The one thing is, like, the Myers, it was Isaac Meier. It was M-E-I-E-R. Like with a lot of words around the turn of the century into the 18th century, usually they would English up the names, and sort of that's where the English spelling of M-Y-E-R S came from. But his original spelling was M-E-I-E-R. This was also originally called Tulpahawken after the Tulpahawken Creek, and they did eventually change it because, as we've talked about in the video here, he was murdered. Some people say he was assassinated. Nobody really knows for sure, beyond the fact that he was shot through a tavern window. I think it was Buke's Tavern, and he shot in the back, I guess, and they never found the person that did it. So normally they'd find people because they'd be stupid and brag to somebody, but why somebody decided to go after him, nobody knows. But this is named after Isaac Meier, and let's go to the Isaac Meier Homestead, talk a little bit more about the history of Myerstown, and we'll go visit the cemetery down at Tulpahawken Reformed Church and visit his gravesite. Thanks, everybody. I want to add a quick correction. It was founded in 1768. I just couldn't read that sign. But it is 1768, not 1762.
So we are here at the Isaac Meier Homestead. This has been restored. I believe it was back in the 70s when they restored it because it had really fallen into a lot of disrepair. Now, this was built in several sections. This is originally the home of a gentleman. His last name was Herculode. He was actually the father-in-law of Isaac Meier. He made a number of bad investments and wound up having those debts called in on him, and unfortunately he had the house taken, I guess sheriff's sale or whatever you want to call it, and he owed quite a bit of money to Casper Wister, which we talked about him. We'll be going to the Tulpahawken Reformed Church, or the UCC now. Their cemetery, that church, the parcel of land that was given was from Casper Wister. We've heard his name a number of times. We've talked about the local history. He was a merchant from Philadelphia, did very, very well for himself. He was known for donating it, the whole thing, the 1 rose annually, given to the descendants of Casper Wister as the payment. It was a pretty neat little thing that they did. But anyways, Isaac Meier eventually wound up buying this, and I think this is the original house, and then he built on like the summer kitchen and that type of stuff. But this is on the National Registry of Historic Places. I do believe there is a sign here which we'll check out. But this was known to the local residents as the Old Fort. Home of Isaac and Catherine Herculode Meyer, is M-E-I-E-R, and then eventually Englishized into M-Y-E-R, which is where the Myerstown. Circa 1750, placed by the Tulpahawken chapter of the Daughters of the American Colonists, 1968. This is such a beautiful home, and this would have been used during the French and Indian War time period. It would have been used as a place of refuge, so it makes sense. He was the founder of Myerstown, and the town was laid out in 1768. And we will talk more about Isaac Meier and this town of Myerstown, Pennsylvania.
Okay, so in early 1730s, German immigrants settled in the area that's now known as Myerstown. On early maps, Myerstown was called Hercule Road, after the first landowner, Mr. Valentine Hercule. The house still stands there. It's known today as the Isaac Meier house, which is what we're looking at right there. Unfortunately for Mr. Hercule, he made some bad investments. We talked about that earlier, and owed quite a deal of money. And ultimately, Caspar Wister called in his debts, and he lost the home. What you see here today is not the entirety of what it was, because Isaac Meier added on. Later on, Isaac Meier married Mr. Hercule's daughter, Catherine, and bought the home and plantation. The home is located near Tulpehocken Creek, and the town was later known not just as Tulpehocken, apparently, but Tulpehocken Town. And that word is a Lenape Indian word, which means land of the turtles. Mr. Meyer laid out the streets for his town in 1768. Unfortunately, in July of 1770, Isaac Meier was shot and killed in a local tavern. Excuse me, and I believe that was the Butte Tavern. The home actually still stands today. The murderer or assassin, whichever one it was never found. And eventually, the town became known as Myertown in tribute to him. And after a while, the spelling of the name like we had talked about sort of took on the English form of Meyer, M-Y-E-R, rather than the German form of M-E-I-E-R. Many of the early homes in Myerstown area were built of limestone or logs. Examples of these original buildings can still be seen on Main Avenue, South Railroad Street, and South Cherry Street. During the 1820s, a part of the Union Canal ran through the borough. In fact, the first bit that was organized by George Washington was built right off of the Tulpehocken Manor. Now, that part of the original canal, once they ran out of money, they actually took the stones and built the Union Canal. I guess it was the offices on Maple or Grace. I think it's Grace Avenue. Or it is, I'm sorry, it is Maple Avenue. It's Maple Avenue, I think right across from Brandt's feed mill in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. But that part of the Union Canal was never used. They actually ran it about just south of there, and because the locks were way too narrow. They didn't have the foresight, because what they had at that time was much smaller, much more narrow. One of the things I talked about that I like a lot with canals is over in England they have the whole canal system, and they have what they call narrow boats and the wide boats. Well, the wide boats can't fit in certain locks because they're just not wide enough, so they can't travel those parts of the canal. They can only either travel in the north and the south, and they sort of had this problem. The Union Canal had to be one continuous canal from Reading area over to like Middletown, Harrisburg. So they had to basically re-dig that area of the line just south of there to make the locks wide enough for what would eventually the canal boats would be, just too wide for those locks. The canal running through there really helped Myerstown to flourish, and soon factories, hotels, and stores sprang up in the vicinity. In the 1850s, the Lebanon Valley Railroad was built south of the Union Canal, which brought more prosperity to Myerstown. After the Civil War, horse trading was a large business in Myerstown. Also, another really cool business that they had was cigar making. Was very, very big in that general area, because I think the towns of Newmanstown and Richland, which are southeast of Myerstown, that was also a big bit of trade. They eventually wound up having the Palatine College started, which later became Albright College, and today is now the Evangelical School of Theology. During the Civil War, many of the young men in the area volunteered to fight for their beliefs. Several of the many heroes of the Union forces were born and raised in Myerstown. One of them was Color Sergeant Henry Brem of the 149th Pennsylvania Regiment. He was mortally wounded in the Battle of Gettysburg on July 1st, 1863, and died of his wounds in August of that year. His body was returned to his home and is buried in the Union Cemetery on Washington Avenue. Was eventually incorporated in 1912. They also have the Pennsylvania Governor John Andrew Schultz was from just down the road in Stroudsburg. We went to Christ Lutheran Church, and we also did the historic marker, but he was the first pastor of Frieden's Lutheran Church, which was in essence an offshoot of the Christ Lutheran Church down in Stroudsburg. And the same thing like the Reformed Church, the Tulpehocken Reform, which is where Isaac Meier is buried. That actually the offshoot, the Reformed Church, which is still standing today, which is right across from the Union Cemetery, which was a union of both Lutheran and Reformed. That church is still there today. But the original Friedens that John Andrew Schultz preached at is gone. They had torn it down and then built a new structure, I think, in the 70s, which is just north of there, right along Route 422, and on the other side would be Washington Avenue. It's sort of right in between those two. Really pretty church. But Myerstown has a phenomenal history, a really, really cool town. We'll do a walk through at some point, and you can see some of the cool architecture, and we'll talk about, they had the oldest furniture store, the Bainey Furniture Store, operating furniture store in the country. For the longest time until they shut down. I think it might have been 2012 when they finally shut down. A lot of history. Really cool place to go and visit and just drive through, and a lot of other neat towns right around there. But a lot of history, and that's Myerstown.
All right, so we're here at the Tulpehocken Reformed Church. It's now United Church of Christ, but this is what it was back in the day. It was the Tulpehocken Reform. And for the foundations, the hometown foundations, we are visiting the gravesite of the founder of Myerstown, Isaac Meier. And as we talked about before, we visited here several times. He was actually, if you will, I think the best way to put it, you say murdered, but assassinated is probably a better way of putting it. He was at, I believe, the front window of, it's called Buch's Tavern, I believe. Might be Buck's Tavern is how it's pronounced, but it's B-U-C-H. And the house still actually exists. I'm just not sure exactly where. But he is buried right over here, and they put out a reward and everything, and they just never found the killer. And it was at some point, because the town had been called Tulpehocken, and then they changed it to fortunately there's a lot of water on there, but this is Isaac Meier. Unfortunately, you're not gonna be able to read it much because it's actually looks like glass over top of that, so you're doing that to preserve it. That's different from the last time, but this is Isaac Meier's gravesite here. He was the founder of Myerstown. They eventually went through several different spellings because his is M-I-E. It's not like M-Y-E-R, which would be, or M-E-Y-E-R. It's as M-E-I-R-E-R, something along that lines. But this is the gravesite of Isaac Meier. And like I said, he was murdered. They do talk about it at times more as like an assassination. Somebody shot him through that front window in the back, and he ultimately died. We'll be visiting the Meyer Homestead before this as well, having filmed this first, just where I was driving. But it's another one of those really just beautiful, serene old Revolutionary War period cemetery. And then we'll talk a little bit more about Isaac Meier, being the founder of Myerstown, and how much he meant to that town.